Well, I want to welcome you back to the start. This is Blooper Rolls with Matt Lake and Gannon Sims, and I'm the chief blooper here. But perhaps we can stitch this audio together, and I want to welcome you to the Fresh Expressions podcast. I'm Gannon Sims. I'm joined by none other than Matt Lake, who serves as a trainer and strategist on the U.S. Fresh Expressions team and as pastor of First Church, Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And Matt's been a brilliant companion on the journey for all of us as he has sought to lead his congregation, historic church, into a new reality where there's a much more robust emphasis on discipleship, on mission, on experimentation, and on fresh expressions of church. So we're going to talk about this concept a little bit, concept we frequently refer to as the blended ecology. Blended ecology. And Matt, could you just venture an explanation for our audience and as to what we mean when we say blended ecology?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's great to be with you today. And when we're talking about blended ecology, essentially what we're talking about is, for us, we are a historical church. Our facility's been in existence, our primary facility, since 1929. And so we do a lot of things that you might associate with a more historically established church. And we gather for worship in our sanctuary on Sunday mornings. And we have, specific identified ministries that many churches do, such as children's ministry areas and youth ministry areas and visitation and all of those things. And we seek to live into those areas to the best of our ability. At the same time, we increasingly have embraced, as part of our identity, being sent out into our community to meet people on their turf and to establish discipleship, connection, relationship, and ultimately church where they are. And so we have a series of fresh expressions that exist that we are connected with. We call it the Acts Network in our setting. And we're just as committed to that mindset, that we're not only going to gather in our sanctuaries on Sunday, but we're going to seek to worship with people on their locations, on their time, in styles that they can connect with throughout the rest of the week. And for me, a lot of times I go to the biblical background, which is really helpful to me. It's just the reminder in Acts chapter 2 that people met at the religious temple area, the official established religious area, and they met in people's homes. And both seem scripturally to be given credibility and validity. And so we've really tried to embrace that mindset and to recognize one is not better than the other, but there are strengths to both. And when you mix the strengths of both together, you have this blended ecology out of which new forms of vitality seem to emerge. And we're just living into that and seeing what we're learning.
What are you learning?
Learning lots. One thing I would certainly say is that, first of all, I just kind of alluded to it. There are strengths of both. It's really easy to think that one is the right way of doing it and one is not. Really that is not true. There are great strengths for both. And for me right now, especially in this season in which we find ourselves, which is, if I could use the word volatile at so many levels, with COVID and pivoting and cultural wars and all kinds of things, I'm learning that in our situation, this blended ecology in many ways provides a more resilient opportunity, I believe, to be church, because we're not dependent just on one form. And if that one form breaks, then suddenly we're not able to exist anymore. And so little did we know that things like experimentation and flexibility and being more nimble, all those things that tend to come with, we call it the sense side of who we are, this fresh expression side of who we are, that was preparing us even for the more gathered formal side of who we are, that who would have guessed 2 years ago that Sunday morning sanctuary worship would have to do this major change and either stop or be recorded or whatever form people took. But the very fact that we've been living into this more nimble form anyhow, we had a shock like everybody. But I think in some ways the shock, I don't know if I'd say it was lesser, but I felt like it allowed us to adapt a little bit easier because we'd already had some of that DNA being woven into who we are.
So walk us back a a few years to just share with us how your congregation led to invest so heavily in, first of all, discipleship.
Yeah.
Discipleship.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've said to a few folks, I would love to say, well, thanks to my brilliance and foresight to look forward, I was like, hey, we're going to really need to focus on discipleship, and this is what the church should do. But none of that would be true. Thankfully, God, I'd say, moved in spite of my own ignorance. And really I remember one specific moment that kind of was one of those catalytic moments of moving us in this direction of a blended ecology and discipleship at the same time. And it was this. We offered at the time what I considered our most robust discipleship program. And we offered it to many of our most mature, vital disciples. And I remember one of those individuals who, to me, he's just sort of at the top of what you want and hope for in a disciple of Jesus. We finished this, in my mind, robust program. And he walked out of the last session and he looked at me, and I don't even think he meant it the way it came out, but he said to me, "Is this all there is?" like, is this it? Like, we're done? And I just had this sort of moment of like, wow, like I just gave you what I thought was my best in this robust thing. And he left feeling wanting in many ways. And I just share that to say that really started us on a journey of saying, well, if what we're currently doing programmatically is not speaking into discipleship for people today and the people connected with our church and equipping them in the culture that we currently live in, we need to take a serious, hard look at what we're doing or not doing and kind of start again. And so that's really what we did. And that eventually led to something that we in our setting called a discipleship journey. It's a 4-step journey, but it's quite different than anything I've encountered in other places. I would say if you looked at it as an overview, steps 1 and 2 would look similar to other churches where people join in the life of the church and then they volunteer in some capacity. But for us, we've added a couple more steps where we're not seeking to create church volunteers. We're seeking to create disciples that we empower in living into fully their giftedness, and whether they are wired to work within more the gathered side of who we are or to be sent out into the community missionary-wise and relationally and all of those kinds of things, and incarnationally, equally seeking to empower them, that we're not just looking for, again, volunteers to run our church programs. We're looking to create disciples who are meeting people in their context and going from there. And that was a pretty big change for us. And, we're still experimenting our way along in that, but I at least haven't heard somebody say, "Is this all there is?" So that's been good.
It's deeply encouraging. So, talk to me about how you define discipleship, and then maybe a story of someone who you've seen sort of go from not quite sure to, aha, I can do this.
Yeah, sure. So maybe the easiest way to say that in terms of discipleship is, at a most basic level, we would view discipleship as being a follower of Jesus. So the key word there in the follow is that it's action oriented. Our actions match our belief. The way we've sought to break that down in our setting is we help people, first of all, connect to the body of Christ and in Christ. So connect is step 1. We then help people discover their giftedness, whatever that may be. But then for us, step 3 is we seek to help people embrace that giftedness that in a way will lead to a sense of multiplication, being sent out, where they then are investing in others who can help raise up others, who can help raise up others. That's how we've broken it down. And a great example of that for me is a woman named Charlene. Charlene had been one of those individuals who sat in the church pew on Sunday morning for really about 30 years. And she was great. She was great when she was, sitting in the pew. But I think she viewed herself as that was the extent of discipleship. And one of the things that Charlene has come to understand is that she has a real heart for elderly and for seniors. And once she realized and discovered more of that giftedness, we really encouraged her to embrace that and what that looks like in her life. And for her, as she considered what it meant to embrace that giftedness, Charlene was surprised to discover Alan Hirsch talks a lot about APEST, so apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers. And traditionally, I would say much of the gathered side of the church is pretty heavy on shepherding and teaching, and those are wonderful gifts. we tend, though, to be lacking a lot of times of being apostles who are sent and sharing the good news of Christ. And one of the things that Charlene discovered as we went through our disciples journey is that she had a stronger sense of sharing the good news and even being sent than what she had originally realized. So even though she had this shepherd heart, she was willing to go out. And so what that ended up leading to for her was she was willing to go to one of our local nursing homes, and she has been serving there, connecting with the residents and helping them grow in discipleship and even worship together. So much so that she's really owned the particular nursing home that she's in. She sends notes to all of the individuals. She meets with them for worship experiences. She's helped them connect in some worship, some Christmas opportunities even. So her work in that way has been a really wonderful sense of seeing her shepherding heart be encouraged to move in a more apostolic way. And now we've got this worshiping community that is slowly emerging, even in a nursing home, from a lady who sat for 30 years in a pew on Sunday morning and thought that was the extent of her discipleship.
I think so often we have to help people reimagine what it means to follow Jesus, because they're doing what they think they're supposed to do.
Right.
No one's ever given them the option of doing anything else.
Right.
So, that's certainly a story of hope. Where else are you finding hope in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in a couple ways. One is we're finding hope just in new possibilities. So I feel like right now, maybe less than almost any time I've been in ministry, there's less resistance to trying something new. All these things we have counted on for so long, we either no longer have confidence in or we see that they're just not working. So there's a wonderful openness that hasn't been there before. That openness is leading to new opportunities for creativity. So that is a gift right now that we have. And just being able to empower people and say, try it, experiment around it, see what happens. That has been great. And I think I would also say that we're not any different than any other church or most other churches right now where there's less people than what we normally see, again, on a Sunday morning time or whatever. However, what's been a gift, I think, is seeing that those who come or those who engage, they're truly engaged. There's a depth to their discipleship. There's a ruggedness to their discipleship. And so there's almost a sense of if you're here now, it's because you're really choosing to be. And therefore, there's a commitment and a hunger and a passion and a desire that's not being watered down by others who might be floating along with you. There's been sort of this separating out. And actually, that's a gift to be able to be more connected directly with people who want to be all in.
The all-in mentality, and it's almost like it's self-corrected in some ways, but how else have you sort of witnessed people going all in?
I would say a couple ways. So again, I want to go back to the idea of open to new. I feel like new in the past used to threaten people. And I think part of that was because we would say we relied on God, but I'm not sure we really did. I think maybe we meant that sincerely, but I think we also relied on the programs and the other things that came naturally to make our understanding of church be church. But because those have been removed or are being removed to some degree, now for people to be all in, it's sort of like, well, we're going to do what we're doing, but we're totally open to trying something new. And again, not getting that static, because I feel like the focus is shifting not so much on what's working for our form of success, but rather what's truly faithful in this moment and a willingness to engage in that. And that sense of all in is really, really good. We are noticing among some of our folks that because those people are all in, they're willing to prioritize in a way that maybe they did not before. So I think COVID is kind of this weird thing where simultaneously we have more time when things are canceled, but at the same time, less bandwidth than ever. And one of the things I'm seeing from the all in folks is their prioritization to say, I'm going to be engaged and I'm going to be engaged in this way, and I'm going to make it a priority with my resources and my time. And so that's been a great thing. I mentioned earlier, too, about the disciples' journey we're going through. Just to give you an example, it usually acts kind of as a funnel. So discover is where you get the most people, and then connecting, and then discovering, and then embracing, and then multiplying. I'd have to actually look at the numbers, but percentage-wise, this time as we're going through it this year right now, we're going to have about as many people in our disciples' journey step 3, which is a higher commitment than our disciples' journey step 2. The numbers aren't super high, but it's also not shrinking the way it normally does. And to me, that's a sign, again, that if you're going to take a step, you're going to be all in and you're going to keep moving as far as it will go. And that's been really encouraging.
Healthy parts of the body. So what about the ways in which you have seen, I don't know, something maybe that surprised you the most in this last 2-year cycle of pandemic reality? Has there been something that just made you go, oh, okay, we can do this? I mean, in addition to the pruning that you've already, sort of suggested, but what else has sort of given you hope or surprised you, I guess, about this season?
You can say surprised in a good way or a negative way?
No, please. You can do both, actually. That'd be really helpful for the audience, I think.
Sure. So I guess maybe surprised in a more negative way for me might be, I think a lot of the things that we saw happening pre-pandemic, I have been surprised at the speed with which they've happened through the pandemic. So if you had fringe people before the pandemic and seeing them occasionally, I mean, the speed with which that during the pandemic, like those people that were on the fringe, I mean, there's been a significant drop off there. That has surprised me. I'm increasingly surprised as well I feel like that during the height of COVID, when people were most locked away, when that happened, people were able to be sort of in this endless cycle of news feed that most affirmed their beliefs or their leanings. So I've been surprised at how hard it is now to speak into that reality, that if your voice is different than what they spent all of that time hearing on a 24/7 news cycle or social media cycle or whatever you want to call it, man, that has been a challenge. So, in that regard, divisions, if you want to call it that, have really become much stronger than I would have anticipated, and that happened much faster than I would have anticipated. So I think I would say some of those things, but at the same time, you can argue this both ways. I've been surprised at how resilient the church is. Like whether that was meeting online or even now that we can meet again, despite all the challenges that are out there, church keeps happening. And that's been really exciting. So the resiliency of the church, I already mentioned things such as creativity and an openness. Those have been great things. I think I would also say, though, I've also been surprised at the importance of relationship has been highlighted for me in ways that I would not so much wouldn't have expected, but rather the level of importance of it. So, for example, this has amazed me a couple times now. There have been some individuals that we literally have not seen for a couple of years in a gathered formal worship setting. And yet when we have run into them in other places through community and those kinds of things, they've immediately said or made reference to still being part of our church. And so it's really kind of messed with my head to say, what is it then that causes us today to qualify in my own mind that I am connected with a church? If I'm not seeing them real regularly, and if I'm not seeing them in worship, how is that working? And part of what I'm realizing in that is because we've had a walk with them, just because we haven't seen them as recently, that did not equate to them no longer being connected in our part of the body of Christ. They would say, it's been sort of the craziness of life and it's kept them away, but it hasn't taken them away, meaning out of the body. And so that's been interesting. And that's sort of simultaneously a word of caution of like, well, gosh, how do we form a relationship then? Or what does that mean to be in a relationship? But at the same time, it's actually given me hope because I'm like, oh, the door isn't closed there. These are people I thought maybe were gone forever. And I'm suddenly realizing, oh, they're not. And so there's a new opportunity to re-engage and grow together. And that's been invigorating. Just because I don't see them doesn't mean there's not still a connection upon which we can build. So that's been a great surprise and in a good way as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything that you're reading or something that's helpful to you as you sort of navigate the season?
Well, in the last couple of years, I had the opportunity to finish my dissertation. And one of the things we needed to read with that was a book called Patient Ferment. By Kreider. And I have to say, so it's a look back at the early church. And that actually has been super helpful for me because seeing what the early church, how discipleship occurred in a culture that, Christianity was not known or it was not friendly towards, like, what did this early church do? And in order to make and foster these mature disciples, man, there have been so many great parallels in that, not the least of which has been, it's just going to take time and intentionality and more time and more intentionality. So that's been really great. I've also enjoyed some of the work with John Mark Homer, Mark Sayers. They've really done some great things, and they have a podcast called This Cultural Moment. But I don't think it's even I think it's done actually, but their ability to look ahead, again, I feel like I listen to that and I feel like, man, there are so many parallels to what's going on today. It just helps me make connections that I'm not sure I would have made on my own. And then I've referenced our disciples' journey a lot of times throughout this podcast today. And again, Alan Hirsch, Michael Frost, they've done just such great work around the APES stuff, and Alan with Forgotten Ways. That book we just kind of come back to again and again and again in our own journey. But those are a couple of things that have been really helpful to me.
Well, Matt, thanks for your time today. You've been listening to the Fresh Expressions podcast with Matt Lake on the Blended Ecology.